Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordia Glory video. In today's episode, we once more shall be casting our critical eye over the Imperial Guard 10th edition index. This time, we shall be reviewing everyone's favourite wall, the Aegis defence line. This prefabricated barricade can be found all over the Imperium. The Guard deploys them in vast quantities. At least in the fluff they do. But what about in the crunch? How does the new Aegis defense line stack up on the tabletop? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's dive right into today's episode. As is tradition, let us start this video by trying to understand what the hell this thing actually is. Because the Aegis defense line is not a typical unit. Sure, it does get deployed, but it doesn't move around. It's not a tank, it's not infantry, it doesn't have any guns or close combat capabilities. It's a wall, and essentially it's a fortification. Now, if you're coming over from 9th edition, coming into 10th edition, there's something really important you need to know about fortifications before we go any further. They are no longer invincible. You see, back in 9th, fortifications were essentially terrain pieces that you could put down. It was no different from putting down a ruin or something like that. And they had all sorts of janky rules about how they couldn't be deployed near other bits of terrain and so on and so forth. All of that's gone now. Basically, this acts like a normal unit. You can deploy it, but as you're about to see, they do have wounds and other characteristics. Speaking of which, why don't we try and start to make heads or tails of this thing by taking a look at its stat line. So it's got a movement of dash. Brilliant. That's normal. And then it's got a toughness of 12, which is actually pretty impressive. That's as tough as a Rogel Dawn, and we all know how good they are. Then it's got a 2+ save, 10 wounds, leadership 7, and OC of 0. This means that once this unit has been deployed, it cannot move, and it also cannot hold objectives. So for all of you that were thinking, I'm going to get a wall and ring it round my home objective and then not actually have anyone looking after it, that's not going to work. The wall does not have any capability of holding an objective without someone actually on the wall. Interestingly, the Aegis defense line can suffer from battle shock because it does have a leadership value. I'm now imagining some kind of Tyranid monster reaching out and putting its hand on the Aegis defense line and going, "It's afraid." But the most important stat out of all of those is the wounds characteristic. This thing can be destroyed. If you do 10 wounds to the Aegis defense line, the whole thing gets picked up and removed as a casualty, just like as if it was a small vehicle or a squad. But what is the Aegis defense line's unit composition? Because if you flip the data card over, it just says 1 Aegis defense line. Does that mean everything you get in the box? Well, don't worry, dear viewers, because GW has realized that 1 unit of Aegis defense line doesn't really mean much, and they've clarified what each Aegis defense line is in an FAQ. Now, I will try and make sure I link the FAQ down in the description of this video, but just in case I am forgetful and my Ogren brain strikes, I will read out verbatim the FAQ bit of the Aegis defense line. Add deployment section to read. When this model is set up, it will consist of 1 platform section, up to 5 shield sections, up to 2 broken shield sections, and up to 2 end sections. All sections must be connected to each other to form a continuous defense line. The 2 broken shield sections can be placed either at the end of the defense line or in the middle of it, such that both are within half an inch of each other. In this case, these 2 sections count as being connected to each other. All of the sections that have been set up are then treated as a single model for all rules purposes. Interestingly, what this means is when you buy an Aegis defense line from Games Workshop, you actually are getting 2 Aegis defense lines, because that makeup that they've described in the FAQ actually only consists of half the bits you get in the box. So it actually makes a little bit more sense that the Aegis defense line does cost as much as it does. It's about 50 quid on the GW website, because you're not getting 1 unit, you're getting 2. Think of it like when you buy your Armigers or your Helvrins. Those are 2 models that you're getting in 1 box, and that's why they cost about 50 quid for a box of them. But now let's drag ourselves back to the datasheet. And before we get into the abilities, there's a few little quirky bits I want to cover, just in case I forget about them later on. Firstly, that movement of dash. Now, that means it cannot move. I heard some people early on when they were looking at this unit saying, lol, check out the wall that's going to charge you. You know, in Soviet Russia, wall charges you and all that kind of stuff, but it can't charge. There is a specific line in the core rules that says any unit that has a movement value of dash cannot move for any reason whatsoever. So apologies, but the idea of the offensive storm wall coming at you isn't any more than a funny meme. But what isn't a meme and is actually a reality is you can order the Aegis defense line, because Lord Solar Leontus can order any 3 Astra Militarum units. And this is an Astra Militarum unit. He is the War Whisperer. Now, when you actually think of the orders that can affect this thing, it's not very many. You can't tell it to take aim because it's got no weapons. You can't tell it to fix bayonets for the same reason. You can't tell it to take cover. I wish you could, but take cover doesn't affect units which have a better than 3+ save, so that doesn't quite work. Maybe it would help with some kind of high AP defense, but I don't think it quite works like that, the take cover order. The one order that can work on this thing is duty and honor. So you can tell your Aegis defense line to have an OC of 1. So when I said it couldn't hold objectives before, I have to admit I was lying slightly. That covers all of the weird shit. Now let's get back to how you're actually going to use this thing on the tabletop. We'll start off by taking a look at those abilities. The first one is Emplacement Platform. Friendly Astra Militarum infantry models can be set up or end any type of move on top of the platform section of this fortification. This rule isn't some kind of weird Da Vinci code. Don't try and look for any hidden meaning. It's literally just there so you can put infantry on this model, because normally models can't go on top of models in 40k. After this, you've got Reinforced Cover. Each time a range attack is allocated to a model, if that model is not fully visible to every model in the attacking unit because of this fortification, that model has the benefit of cover against that attack. This is actually really big. It's actually a very big deal, because it means that you can have your Aegis defense line strung out across an important fire lane, and any units that you've got behind it, even if they're not particularly in range, they could be 20 inches behind, it doesn't matter. Any units that are behind this thing, even if they're not near to it, if your opponent is shooting across the Aegis defense line, they get the benefit of cover. Now bear in mind that this isn't limited to infantry. So if you're looking at how you can get the benefit of cover on some of your vehicles and artillery and stuff like that, the Aegis defense line might just be the thing for you. Now on a competitive board, typically most things are either benefiting from cover or they're out of line of sight. However, there are always going to be those firing lanes, be aware of that, and importantly, not every tournament is exactly the same. Not everyone uses UKTC terrain or WTC terrain or some other kind of prefixed one. Sometimes tournaments just use their local terrain. Maybe you're not even going to a tournament, just playing at home on Battle Bunker with your beer and pretzels and your mates. In those situations, if you're finding that your gaming group tends to play with a little bit less terrain, maybe it's a bit sparse, maybe there's bit of line of sight blocking but not much benefit of cover, the Aegis defense line isn't a bad thing to include. You can use it to actually start giving yourself cover, and in this kind of niche scenario it's pretty helpful, because if your army's benefiting from cover and your opponent's army isn't, you're going to have a distinct advantage in that scenario. However, it's the next ability which is the main star of the show. It's the hot tamale. Defense line. While an Astra Militarum infantry model has the benefit of cover as a result of this terrain feature, see above, that model has a 4+ invulnerable save. That's right. Any infantry that are behind the Aegis defense line, even if they're not in range of it, they could be inches and inches behind, they could be over a foot behind, it doesn't matter. If your opponent is shooting over the Aegis defense line and they're shooting an infantry unit that is benefiting from cover because of the Aegis defense line, they get a 4+ invulnerable save. That is huge. That's actually wild. It means that with a couple of these things, potentially you could block off your fire lanes and put loads of units behind them and they're all getting a 4+ invulnerable save. Sure, it's only your infantry, but in my mind, I'm thinking maybe some sort of pure infantry tactics where you can't quite hide everyone behind the L-shapes. There's always those units that end up getting stuck out in the open and getting blown off the table. It's always a bit of an annoyance. Well, you know what? Maybe you take an Aegis defense line and suddenly you're rocking a 4+ invulnerable save across a lot of your army. And it means that you're going to take a lot less damage. It's going to cut the damage, the amount of casualties you're going to take, in half. It's a really strong ability. It's really nice. It genuinely, I think, has some merit. Or at least it would do if we were playing in 9th edition. I know, I'm building you guys up and now I'm knocking you down. I'm so sorry. It's a roller coaster of emotions, this video. The thing is, the Aegis defense line itself can be destroyed. It's only got 10 wounds. A barrage of concentrated anti-tank fire, a few las cannons here and there, will take it down. And when it's gone, it just disappears. It just goes away. It's just removed as a casualty. And suddenly all the infantry that you were stacking up behind it, hoping they'd get a 4+ invulnerable save, just don't. And if you are running pure infantry, what happens is your opponent uses the anti-tank, which wasn't going to be very effective against your guardsmen anyway, to just pick up the Aegis defense line, and then they just start blasting your infantry again. That defense line ability would be potentially S tier if the Aegis defense line couldn't just be destroyed with a bit of spare AT fire. But it's not all doom and gloom, because this last ability does give us a little insight into how you can make the ADL work for you. It's called Fortification. While an enemy unit is only within engagement range of one or more fortifications, you can still shoot into combat with it, but you do suffer a -1 unless you're a pistol, and that enemy unit doesn't need to make a desperate escape test due to falling back while battle shocked. Basically, the wall can't catch them and run them down, and you can still shoot into combat whilst they are trying to fight the wall. But that last part's important, because unlike in previous editions, this is one thing that the Aegis defense line can actually do better now than it could in 9th. It can move block. It can charge block your opponent. Think about it. In previous iterations of 40k, you lined your guys up behind the defense line, and what happened is your opponent could charge the wall, and then because it was essentially just terrain feature, they just fought over the wall. That was it. That was all that happened. But now, the Aegis defense line is a unit in its own right. And so if you want to fight the infantry behind it, you've got to actually destroy the defense line. Now, for some units, that's not going to be a problem. They're going to go in there with all sorts of chain fists and power fists and big demon claws and tyrannid tendrils, and they're going to rip the wall apart, of course. But for a lot of units, especially the kind that want to destroy infantry, like Gene Stealers and Orc Boys and anything else that just puts out a crap load of low strength attacks, the Aegis defense line is an absolute bloody nightmare. It's T12. That means most of the time they're wounding it on 6s, and it's got a 2+ save. So even if they do wound it, it's probably going to pass most of its saves anyway. At best, it'll probably be taking AP -1 or AP -2 attacks. So what's kind of crazy about this is you could have an Aegis defense line being manned by infantry, and it just completely blocks, completely stops one of your opponent's big death combat units from just coming in there and just mulching 20 or more guardsmen. and they just spend the whole time just scratching their claws against the ceramite walls. I've actually experienced something like this in 10th edition. In one of the early battle reports, I had a bunch of Gene Stealers go in against a Space Marine Rhino. Now, in 9th edition and 8th edition, those Gene Stealers would just turn that Rhino into paper mache. They were torn to pieces. But in 10th, they just bounced. They did like 2 or 3 wounds. And I can't help but think that if my guard could essentially benefit from that kind of durability, and they can just sit there and just blast away at the Gene Stealers whilst they're just trying to ineffectively claw a wall to death, that's actually quite valuable. Because don't forget, the new combat rules means that people have to charge straight forward. There's no going round things, and once they're base to base, they have to stay base to base. They can't start like staying a little bit away and wrapping around the sides of the defense line. It's a pretty niche scenario, and it's only going to pop up in a few matchups, but with Tyranids being on the horizon and that codex coming out and them having detachments like Endless Swarm, which clearly is going to favor the small bugs, and they've got the Vanguard Onslaught as well, which specifically favors things like the Von Ryan's Leapers and the Gene Stealers. Maybe the Age Defense line isn't meta, but maybe it will actually have a place in a few friendly games. But unfortunately, that is the only place you're going to find the ADL, because its points cost is so ridiculous. And not in a good way. You will never see it in a serious competitive list. Oh, you might see it in some meme lists, but you ain't going to see it taking top table anytime. It's 100. Even if I just said 100 points, that would be too much, right? But it's 145 points. It's absolutely ridiculous. This thing can just be destroyed. If it was 100 points and couldn't be destroyed, it might be worth it. If it was 45 points and could be destroyed, it might be worth it. But under no circumstances is it worth it for 145 points. Maybe if you got all of the sections in the box, maybe if you got a double doozy, that would be cool. Maybe if it had some kind of flexible unit composition where you could take 1 for 50 points, 2 for 100 points, that would be cool. But no, 145 points makes this unit, frankly, completely unusable outside of all but the most casual matchups. If you're playing against a friend and he wants to use the Age Defense line, I advise you don't actually set it against his points limit. Just let him take one for free in addition to his 2,000 points. That's how little impact they're likely to have on the game, and that's just how ridiculous giving them this astronomically high price tag is. But of course, that and everything else in this video is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Have you found a way to make the ADL work, or is it just too pricey for what it brings to the table? If you've enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last, but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier patrons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Bombomvert, Ken Starr, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Varney. Thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. You are incredible. Your generosity is truly humbling, and I could just say it 1,000 times over and over again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.